John caught up with Trey Parker and Matt Stone in Telluride, and Matt gets us underway.
It's 52,000 square feet. And like you said, it's basically a humongous restaurant. I think we have 650 seats. And there's a 30-foot waterfall with cliff divers. And when you were growing up in Denver, we grew up, both Trey and I are in our 50s, but when we were growing up, it was the 80s. So growing up in the 80s in Denver, it was just like this magical place. And I'd never gone to Mexico growing up. It felt like, 7 or 8 years old. You walked in, it was all tropical and like humid in there. Now that was from the pool and the chlorine and all the junk, and it wasn't very well kept, but it was just magical. It was like completely transportive when you went as a kid.
And Trey, your memories of it are as much about the experience, not so much the food.
No kid cared about the food, and I mean, because it's like that. The whole thing was as a birthday destination, you just knew you wanted to have your birthday at Casa Bonita, so it just became about who am I inviting to my birthday at Casa Bonita so that I get invited to their birthday at Casa Bonita. And there was this unspoken law that, if I invite you to Casa Bonita for my birthday, then you have to have your birthday at Casa Bonita and make sure I go, because that's how many times in a year you got to go to Casa Bonita. Because it was a bit of a pilgrimage for me, because I grew up in the mountains, and so it was 45 minute to an hour drive, but it was all about the fact that whoever the unlucky parent was that had the birthday boy, they would sit there at the table and we would just run around going crazy for 2 or 3 hours.
They would sit there at the table with a gallon-sized margarita, though. I mean,
absolutely.
Okay, they weren't just like crying in their tears.
Yes.
And as a young adult, is it you who starts to have this fleeting fantasy, like, what would it be like to own this place? When is that first, not the real conversations, but it was like, I wonder what...
I think, by the time I was in college, it had already become, it was sort of a joke. Casa Bonita was kind of a joke. It was a place that you would bring people from out of town, not because it was amazing, but because it was just so bizarre. And the reason it was bizarre was because it was this amazingly huge place that you could tell at one time someone had put a lot of money into, and now it was sort of run down and, dilapidated, and things didn't work. And it just seemed like, what the hell is this? And you would bring people more as a joke. And I think that even then in college, I was like, man, I wish someone would turn this back into what it was supposed to be.
And were there also people who would perform sketches while people were dining?
It was that really bad cheesy thing where, and again, they got to the point where they were paying the same employee to dress up as a cowboy, then go do a dive, then go run and put puppets on their hands and do a puppet show, and then put on a gorilla costume and run around. They were paying the same person to do all of that, but then they would have probably 2 of them at a time, and they'd just be doing the worst sort of bits in front of you. Because it was just that. Even the divers, they were mostly just kind of high school kids that were in their swim shorts. There was no production to it. It was just, it had really gone downhill.
So it wasn't even like you were going there ironically. It was like, this used to be a great place, and now look what it's become.
Maybe it used to be a great, we think it maybe used to be a great place.
I think the original, if you watch the movie, the documentary, the original, Bill Waugh was his name. He's got a great Texas accent, and when you just think, like, when you watch a documentary, the people that built the original Casa Bonita were absolutely inspired and totally nuts. And I think it really was in the beginning like I don't want to say fancy, a nice night out. Like, I think it was supposed to be like, for people in Denver in the 1970s, like, hey, put on your nice clothes and go out and have a nice time. They were really trying to deliver a night in Acapulco, which is, so I kind of liken it to like a tiki bar. Like, it has that sort of kitsch, you know what I mean? Like, it's fake, but it's supposed to just kind of create this ambiance. But by the time we were going in the 80s, this other company had bought it, and it started going downhill.
Right. They were not putting any money into it. It was kind of falling apart. And then the pandemic comes along. They don't survive the pandemic. They have a lot of debt. They go into bankruptcy. And at one moment, I think Trey, it's you, has a light bulb idea. How does the idea, or who's it?
Well, no, it was in the news. I think the first time we were in the South Park office, and I saw on the news Casa Bonita's filing for bankruptcy, and I went into Trey's office and I said, Casa Bonita's going bankrupt. Should we buy it? And it was like one of those things, like, yeah, that'd be funny. And then we went back to work, and I think we forgot about it because we were just so busy doing this show. And then I don't know. I called Trey one day. Somehow we got contacted through somebody that we could be an investor in Casa Bonita. So I called Trey and said, okay, here it comes. Don't freak out. I'm about to tell you something, but don't freak out. We could be investors in Casa Bonita. And Trey said, yes. Before I even finished the sentence, he was like, yes, yes, yes. That turned into like, well, other investors dropped out. It's a long story, but it ended up just being us at the end of the day that owned it. And then we began renovating it and realizing how messed up it was.
Let's talk about the extreme home makeover part of the story, which is the big part of the story. I think it's you, Trey, who comes in and says, I think we just need some carpets and paint.
No, that was
I'm
me.
sorry.
No,
Matt, you come in and say...
I'll never live that down.
So, Matt, you come in and say...
I think new carpets and some... I would said LED lights, like I was some expert on lighting. Like what an idiot. I was like, just LED lights. Like I know what the heck I'm talking about. But it really did seem like, again, it's funny in the movie and it's funny in retrospect, but it was so downtrodden, we stupidly figured it won't be that hard to make a lot better. Or the bar's so low, we just need to make it a little better and it'll be a lot better. And what really sucked about the whole thing, I mean, a lot of things sucked. It was the expensive and everything else, but we were so excited and still are excited about a lot of the creative input we could put in, or that we could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this. The first year was just replacing AC units, fixing kitchen stuff, all the boring stuff. If you've done a house renovation or a bathroom renovation, it's all the stuff you don't see. And so that just, for a year, it was no fun.
I guess it's kind of equivalent to going to visit a house you've never seen. They have a really nice patio, and you open the front door, and it's a hoarder with 87 cats. It is just a fiasco. And you open the next door, and it's even worse. And you have an idea of what it's going to cost, and then you get a quote for the HVAC, which is basically the cost that you had in mind for the entire renovation. And it's gone with one budget item, which is air conditioning. And it's also shabby, but it's dangerous. Can you talk about what the divers have to go through, I guess, to remain alive?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was one of the things in the movie you see is that as we're being guided through, the first time we're being guided through all the horrible stuff behind the curtain, one thing was this sort of 3-foot in diameter hole that the divers, once they jump into the pool, they swam through this tunnel and they came up through this 3-foot diameter hole in this closet that was also the electrical closet of the restaurant. And you literally are just like, wow. I mean, it's amazing nobody died. I mean, it's also possible that people have, because it's possible that people have died from other things because of like what we found in the ceilings and everything. It's like, it's possible people got something and died days later, but it was just, there's no way any permit they would never let you build a place like this now, ever. And that was a big part of it too, was we thought pretty early on, we're like, okay, we could easily buy a warehouse somewhere and build our own Casa Bonita that's twice as big and way better and a fifth of the cost, because we're not trying to, redo something and all these corners and all these things that no one would ever allow anymore. But then again, that's what makes it so special now.
The previous owners made a decision at some point not to fix, but to hide. Yes. And one of my favorite visual images is a bucket in a roof that is there to not repair a leak, but to catch a leak that is periodically drained so said leak does not actually leak. Yeah. It is just really put together with duct tape and baling wire.
It's a huge kitchen, and we had to end up with the kitchen literally having to not just tear out the kitchen but go down to dirt, because they had just taken the kitchen floor and put new pipes in it. Then they would just tile over that and make a new floor to do whatever. Then that would get flooded and it would be mildew. So they'd build another floor on top of that. And we had to take the whole thing down to earth to create a new kitchen.
Naive question. Where is Colorado's food inspectors, safety inspectors? Are they on the Casa Bonita take? Why are they not coming out and inspecting and flagging that stuff?
I have no idea. It makes no sense. I think in the last few years they were just serving chips and Coca-Cola, like it was barely operating. No, when we got a modern today construction crew in there and designers and everything, they were everywhere. They were like, holy shit. No, you shouldn't go in this place. They had, there's some I don't know what, it's not code blue, but there's some code whatever that you say on a construction site, which is walk away. We're worried about a catastrophic failure. There could be a cave in. There's some word for that. I think they did that more than once. Okay, everyone walk away. We're not sure if this is going to stand. And that's in the documentary too. There's a pole that was rotted away. I mean, it was really, really not just codes are different than the 1970s, but combine that with just degradation, and it was a death trap.
Trey, you said you could have bought a warehouse and built it from scratch at half the cost. Does that
a fifth of the cost.
So
Probably.
does that cross your mind?
It did, but it was the same thing as when Matt first was, when he first had said, hey, we could be investors in this. Great. Okay. Hey, everyone else is out because it's a bad idea. We're the only investors. One of the first things that came up was, okay, we can buy the restaurant, but we can't call it Casa Bonita because we don't have the IP. So to do that is an extra, I can't remember how many millions of dollars. And I'm like, but we got to call it Casa Bonita, dude. And it's just like, oh, but no, come on. That's just right. And this is before we knew everything else. It was just right away. We're like, okay, we'll just spend those few extra because it's got to be called Casa Bonita. And so, it was disastrous.
There are different ways to describe what the original version was in terms of its representation of Mexico. Cultural appropriation comes to mind. Inauthentic comes to mind. It was an Americanized version of what Mexico looks like. And one of the things I think you do very soon after you buy it, you go to, I think, Oaxaca. And I think there's a shot of you at Monte Alban. And Oaxaca is famous for its food, a lot of moles. But was part of your mindset not just to go back to that idea of what the joy was when it was operating at its best, but also that it no longer is going to imitate, but it's going to bring Mexican food?
No, because I wouldn't say for a minute that that's what we're doing, because it really is what we wanted to do was the authentic, inauthentic experience, because the reason I went to Oaxaca, by the way, was just because, so we partnered with Dana Rodriguez, who is this amazing chef in Denver. We knew we needed to bring someone in that really knew their stuff with food and restaurants. And Dana had successful Mexican restaurants in Denver and was a James Beard nominated chef. And she was the one that said, Trey, I want to take you to Oaxaca, because she wanted me to have this. She said that you're what you think of as Mexican food. And again, it wasn't even that she was like, this is what we need to do. We need the food to be authentic. She's just like, you don't know Mexican food. Let me show you. Mostly because I was saying I hate moles, because I was like, I hate that chocolate shit. Right. And she's like, that's not, I want you to try a real mole. And that was really, honestly, that's the whole reason we went down there. It wasn't trying to be like, I want to make sure I really know Mexico, because at the same time, my dad had told me, I was like, I want to have the dive shows be, they need to be a production. And Matt and I had talked about how it needed better lighting. It needed better sound. We could do the theater of the dive is what really had to be the first thing we figured out, because that's the heart of Casa Bonita, is the dive show. And so we're like, we got to make this more theatrical. And I was like, I want something musically to tie this all together. And I'm not sure what that music is. You know what I mean? It's like, what is that music? And it was my dad that said, well, it's kind of like, because I was saying how it's inauthentic. It's more like what Matt's saying. It's a tiki bar. It is purposely taking. It is cultural appropriation. It is this. And that these were all white dudes in the 70s that built this place. And we're just trying to create this, again, Disneyland. More than anything. That my dad said, well, the Elvis dive movie, and I'm like, what do you? The Elvis dive. He goes, the Elvis dive movie in Mexico with all the Mexican divers. I'm like, what? Wait, what? I knew all about Blue Hawaii. I knew a lot of other Elvis movies, but I'm like, there's an Acapulco dive Elvis movie. He's like, yeah. And we sat and watched it that night, and I was like, this is the music. This is Casa. This is so Casa Bonita.
It's one thing to say that's the music. It's another thing to license it.
Yes, and that's expensive.
I want to ask you, Matt, about the idea of changes. You have the changes of, we thought we're going to be just able to put in 240 volt, but now we have to dig up the whole panel. And then it's like, what is the theme going to be? What is the story going to be? What are the actors going to be doing? And it seems like later in the film, everybody is frustrated by how long it's taking, but it also feels like the performers aren't sure what the story is that they're telling.
Yeah, it was trying to figure out, and we were still trying to figure out, like, what the binding, I would say, story or mythos or myth of the what's the, it's like in a lot of movies and a lot of plays, like what's you have what you're seeing, but what's underneath it that ties it all together. And with Casa Bonita, there's a few things that make sense, but that was the whole thing, is like there's a gorilla, there's a sheriff, there's Black Bart. So sheriff and Black Bart sort of make sense, that there's Black Bart who's a bad guy and the sheriff's always looking for him. And then there was a couple of other characters. They had Amazon Annie and Queen Isabella, and Yeah, in Mexico, it doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? It really doesn't, and they didn't really care if it made sense. I think we were trying to make something that makes enough sense so that kids are intrigued, but ultimately, it kind of is we say it in the promotional material, but it's kind of a weird 70s fever dream. Do you know the way, we almost think, what's the guys, the HR Puffin stuff, those guys, the Sid and Marty Krofft. Like, it almost has that weird thing of like, it's the looking at it sideways going, how does this make sense that actually is the fun part instead of, oh, I see how it makes sense.
So it's a 2024 idea of what 1974.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, of bringing back. I mean, I think the more important thing to us was just the analog experience of the whole thing, of kids running around, maybe with a little scavenger hunt. They're talking to live characters. The music is live. The animatronics are live. And one of the funny things that happened, this really happened a couple days before our kind of first people coming in, Trey and I looked at each other, and there was a moment, because we really made the place for kids, and we thought, what if kids don't like this? Like today's kids, they've got iPads, they have Netflix, they've got the world in their fingers. Like, what if they think this is dumb?
What if this is Quibi?
Yeah, what if we're Quibi? Oh no, what if we're Quibi? And it was, I will say, it was such a relief, and it was really fun the first day watch kids run around and have a good time.
So that brings up an interesting question. Your sense of humor, by and large, is not 6-year-old sense of humor. Maybe not 8-year-old, but depending on today, maybe 10, 11-year-old, but certainly more grown up. How do you figure out what the balance is, or what the percentage is of what I'll call your sense of humor for South Park or Book of Mormon or other shows versus what's fitting or what's right for the restaurant? Is it a dilution? Is it a different iteration of it?
I don't know. It's a little different. I mean, it's not South Park, and we don't want it to be South Park land. We have a couple of little Easter eggs and a couple of things around, because the South Park and Casa Bonita are tied together forever because of us and because of the episode we did. But it's a family place. It definitely is different in tone.
There was a big moment where we realized that when Casa Bonita was open when I was a kid, they were trying to be, they're like, we're from 1973, but we're going to go back to 1873. So that's why they had their people walking around going, "Tarnation, I'm the sheriff and I'm doing this stuff." You know, it's like, okay, but it's, a Mexican place. Why are you saying tarnation? So, but it was when we realized that, and I remember exactly when it was. I was doing this minor character where you could get a coin, because I wanted kids to be able to get really cool coins from Casa Bonita. And I was doing the voice for it, and he's saying, "Well, we're here in the old times. We're here way back in 1973, and it's like, I just watched Charlie's Angels, and I'm doing all this." And it was when I was doing that for the thing, and I think they captured this in the documentary. I'm like, wait. I was like, this is it. This is what it is. It's 1973 trying to be 1873, right? Because I realized that for my daughter, the 70s are just as weird as anything to her. You know what I mean? So it's like having 70s thing, it really did make her walk around and go, "Wow, what is this? What is this thing?" And we would put weird things just like tube TVs randomly now in Casa Bonita. We just put stuff from the 70s in there, and like 10 lunch boxes with $6 Million Man on them. And kids are like, "Wow, what is that? I don't know what that is. That's weird."
And you have a fortune teller who gives bad fortunes? How would you describe the fortune teller?
Well, it's a fortune telling bird, because they actually had a live macaw in this. And again, this was pre us, because back in, I think when they first opened, the legend is, or what we found out, is that they had this area for a live macaw, and the poor thing was just in there all the time, and then of course, it got too expensive, and I'm sure it died. So they just had this sort of stuffed animal macaw in there, and that's what they always have for whatever. And I, of course, come along and I'm like, I want Disney tiki birds. Like, I want a bird in there that talks to you, gives you your fortune, and does this whole thing. So we have a bird that gives you your fortune, but it has been like the bane of my existence, because this bird never works. I just actually took my family there, 2 weeks ago we were there, and the bird didn't work. And I was just like,
when the bird's working, what is the bird saying? What is the bird
fortune? The bird
fortune?
gives you a bad it tells you, oh, unfortunately, it tries to kind of read your fortune, and it says, "Oh, sorry," and then it poops, and it says, "I've got some bad news," and then it prints out a fortune for you that's always bad.
When you're making a musical, you have a workshop, and then you have previews. When you're opening a restaurant, you have a shakeout dinner, tests like that. Are they at all akin or totally separate ideas?
Yes, it's just our shakeout dinner was a year long, and it's just ending now. we're just finishing our shakeout dinner, and we thought the same thing. We were calling it previews. We're like, let's do previews. We got to bring people in here, and Matt and I were there. We were there to watch because it was just like it is like Broadway. It's a living thing, and you don't know how it is. I remember the last week or two of Book of Mormon, after we'd gone through tech and everything. You're just sitting there going, I don't even know what we have anymore. And everyone, the actors lose it. Everyone loses what it is because you're just sitting there, especially with a big comedy, and then you bring that first audience in and everything changes, and it's just like, oh, right, this is what this is.
Did that happen with Casa Bonita?
It happened, but both in positive ways and that, some ways it's like, oh, this totally isn't going to work the way we thought it was. Because there's so many different, it's not just a show. It's not just an entertainment video. It's actually an entire functioning restaurant too. And all this other stuff on top of it that's like, oh, the way we're even getting people through the door isn't right. The way we're ticketing isn't right,
So how much work is left to be done? And is it operational now? Is there a waiting list? If I wanted to go swing by on Wednesday, could I get a dinner?
Well, if you talk to the right people.
I'm not planning on going, by the way.
Yes. So we just announced today we're making a change. We're open up to the public on October 1st and getting off the email list we've been doing. So starting September 16th, you can get actual just reservations like a regular restaurant.
But there's a few people on the email list.
I think there's over 900,000 now, and they all want 6 tops and 4 tops, So
if I put my name on the email, I might be eating in 2090.
That was kind of what we just finally said. Look, we got to open, and then we have emails going out to. We have an special email going to everyone who's on the email list. They're going to get something special for being there first, so to speak. But yeah, we're finally throwing the doors open on October 1st.
Is there a different satisfaction in creating an episode of a series, creating a movie, creating a musical than there is from what I will say creating a restaurant? Because you basically are down to studs in creating it from the ground up. Is there different? I know the challenges are different, but is the satisfaction?
The satisfaction of doing the show is it's done. And especially not even in Book of Mormon, even it's sort of done and fixed. Although even Book of Mormon in a theater show, it's still live. It's being done by people who are interpreting something. But we started obviously in film and television. When we're done with the South Park, it's encoded in bits and bytes on a piece of done. It's done. And with Casa Bonita, we realized we may never be done.
Trey, what about you for the experience? I mean, it almost sounds like if you had to do it again, would you?
I only would with this because I really honestly don't think anyone else could have or would have done this because it's a bad business idea. No one would have any business advisor look at this and say, I think this is a good idea. It was a very bad business move, but I'm really glad we did it only because of what it is. But Matt and I both could right now do nothing more than live in Denver and oversee Casa Bonita, and it would take all of our time, and I'd actually be pretty happy. Just make sure the dive show's good, change the puppet show once in a while, make sure that bird's always working. We could easily go do that, but we have to go make money doing something, so we got to go make shows.
So why is it called Casa Bonita Mi Amor? It should be Casa Bonita Mi Cabron, Casa Bonita Mi Puta. I mean, I can go on.
I mean, that was there's a clip in the documentary where Trey's in Oaxaca and he's just talking to camera and he just sings off the cuff. Listen to the Elvis stuff and he just sort of sings off the cuff. Casa Bonita Mi Amor. And that was my idea. I saw that clip and I just said, I just love that. I just thought it was it's such an interesting moment in the movie. And I think that the movie, when people see it, it's as much about Trey as it is about the restaurant. And I think at that moment in the movie, you sort of realize that. And I also think it's Trey literally singing a love song to a restaurant. And it's like, this is so stupid, but it's like, it's true, So I really like that. I like the title and that's what it meant.
Matt and Trey, it was so great to talk to you and great to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the creators of South Park.